Welcome to video 2 of our Raspberry Pi robot. In this video, we're going to connect up the motors to the motor controller. We're going to connect up the motor controller to the battery. And then lastly, we're going to connect up the motor controller to the Raspberry Pi. Then we're going to install a project called Wiring Pi from Gordon Henderson that we're going to use to then control the motor, turn the motors on, tell them what direction to go in, using some simple bash scripts that I've created. I selected the project from Gordon, the Wiring Pi, for two main reasons. First one is that it's written in a low-level language, C++, which means it's very quick, very responsive, which we're going to need for controlling it through our web browser. And then number two is that because it is a low-level language, it gets around the need to have root or sudo access to control the GPIO pins, which if you were to use Python or Java, natively you would have to have sudo access to be able to control the pins, which we don't want to do because we're doing this through a web browser, and there would be some security concerns with doing so. So let's take a look at our two TIFF diagrams here. First one of the L298N motor controller. So there's two sets of connections on each side of the module that we're going to connect up our motors to. And then we have a VCC connection, which is going to go to the red connection from our battery, the positive connection. Then we're going to twist together the ground from the battery and from the Raspberry into the ground connection here. And then lastly, we're going to connect up the 5-volt connection to our Raspberry Pi. Remember that this module is going to be powered by the Pi. So that's just to have it operate. And so if we were to run that off the battery, it would drain the battery fairly quick. So that is why we're going to hook up the 5 volts to the Raspberry Pi. And then lastly, we've got 4 pins over here that we're going to connect up to physical pins on the Raspberry Pi, and those are going to be then used to control the motors. So it's going to turn them on, and it's going to tell them what direction the wheel should be spinning. So there's 4 connections. The in 1, 2, 3, 4 on the L298N are going to connect then to pin 11, 13, 15, and 19 on the Pi, and then the corresponding GPIO numbers for each of those. So with that, let's I'm going to switch over to my external camera, and we're going to go through and actually cable up everything that we've talked about here. Okay, now we've got I've got my platform here. I've already have my motor controller mounted to my platform, and as you can see, the 2 motors are connected up and ready to be connected to the motor controller. One thing I forgot to mention earlier on is that typically the red and black cable that come with the motors is a very cheap cable. So what I ended up doing is I bought two small reels of black and white solid copper cable off of Amazon to replace those. Just gives you a much better electrical connection for the 2 motors. I had a lot of issues even trying to strip. There was only literally three strands of copper within the original cables that came with it. Okay, so on my platform, this is the front of the platform. So it will be, driving forward, it will be moving in this direction. So if you're looking at my diagram, which I'm going to be using here to cable this all up here, I want to connect the left motor to the left-hand side here, so these 2 pins that we talked about. So I can confirm that's the left motor because that's right there, and these are the 2 cables coming from that motor. So connect these up, pretty very straightforward. I've got it kind of labeled there, but the black basically goes into the connector that's closest to this little heat sink here. So to connect these up, we just stick a flathead screwdriver in there, loosen it up a bit. Don't loosen it too much, because you'll find that there's a little clip inside that will pop out if you do that. So you just need to loosen it at a couple of turns, and then stick the wire in, tighten it up, like so, and give it a little bit of a tug, and it shouldn't move. So basically we're going to do that 3 more times here for the 2 motors. So loosen that up, stick it in there, and tighten it up. Give it a little tug and it looks good. So same thing on the other side. So for me, the black wire on the right hand side goes on the pin furthest away from the little heatsink that I've got there. So again, if you're looking at the diagram, it'll help you understand what it is I'm doing here. So again, loosen that up a bit, stick the wire in there, and tighten that up. And then same thing with our last motor cable. And like I said, if you have 4 motors, it's really, you would just take the say the red cable from each motor, twist them together, and put them into the one connector. And there's some good YouTube videos on exactly how to cable this up. But don't, like I said, don't worry about if you put it in backwards, because the worst thing that's going to happen is that your motors are going to go in the wrong direction, which is no big deal for us at this point. And, okay. So then we're going to connect up our positive from, that's going to go to our battery. So remember, I've got this barrel connector that I use to connect up my battery, and this is one of the reasons why I did it. It allows me a lot of flexibility here. So I've got the battery disconnected right now, and I'm just going to connect up the barrel connector. So the red on the barrel connector goes into the VCC connection. So we just loosen that off a bit, and then we're going to find a stranded cable. Doesn't go in there quite as good as the solid core, but as you can see, it can be done. Tighten that up good and tight. Give it a little tug, make sure that's good. Okay, so then the black connection, as I said earlier, we're going to connect the ground that's going to go come from the Raspberry and from the battery together. It's very important that you have both of these grounded, because we're feeding voltage to them, and it'll cause having them both kind of connected together like this kind of gets rid of any crosstalk or anything like that. So you just simply kind of twist them together as best you can. I'm using one of the cables I mentioned earlier on. This is a male to female cable, so I'm using the male connection to kind of put into the connector onto the motor controller. Just want to make sure you get that in there nice and tight. Okay, and then lastly, we're going to need a 5-volt cable that's going to connect up to our Raspberry Pi. So for that, I'm actually using just this white cable. I've actually got a shortage of some of these cables. So again, a male to female. I'm just going to put the female connector into there. Or sorry, the male connector into this connection, like so. Tighten that up, and there we go. Okay, so then the last connections we need to make to the motor controller is for our GPIO pins. So again, using the diagram is going to help you out a lot here. And so the first one, IN1, is on my cable is going to be the gray cable. So IN1 is the pin right there, so we just put this on here. IN2 will be the purple. Again, these cables are female to female. IN2 is in there. IN3 is going to be the white cable. And then IN4 will be the black cable. There we go. Okay, so we have the cables now on our motor controller. We then need to grab our Raspberry and connect these cables up to it. So, first one, this is the 5-volt white cable that we are going to connect up to the Raspberry Pi. So again, looking at my diagram, that goes to pin 2. So on the Raspberry Pi, if you don't know already, pin 1 is that one. So pin 2 obviously would connect up to there. We then need to connect up the black ground cable, and the black ground cable goes to pin 6, which is ground. And so you can kind of count down. So if that's on pin 2, the next one down from it is 4, and then 6 will be the next ground cable. Okay, so we've got those two connected. Then we need to connect up the cable that we're going to use to actually control the motors. So again, looking at our diagram, pin 11 is the white cable, which goes to IN3. So you can kind of count down same kind of way. So if that's pin 1 there, that next one from it would be 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. Connect that one up. So then next one down from it is IN2, which is the purple cable, and it goes to pin 13. That would be right next to it. And then we have IN1, which is the gray cable, which goes to pin 15, which again is right next to then the purple cable. And then our last one goes to pin 19, which is the black cable, and that's basically 2 pins down from that. So there's a one pin in between the gray cable and the black cable. So there we go. We've got it all connected up. Last thing we need to do is obviously I need to connect up my battery. So I've got my LiPro battery here. I'm just going to plug it into the barrel connection, like so. You're going to want to make sure this little green button here, at least on mine it's green, I've seen the other boards that are a different color, should be this should be in the up position. You can see when I push it down, the LED turns on, which means that our LiPro battery here is actually powering this module, which we don't want. It'll drain the battery pretty quick. We hooked up to 5 volts from the Raspberry Pi, and so we want to power it from the Raspberry Pi. So it should be in the up position, which turns the LED off because we haven't actually got our Raspberry Pi powered on at this point. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to recommend that you put a block underneath the platform. The reason for this is that we're going to be switching over to our computer here and doing some configuration. And when we do test it out, we're going to try out our motors. You're going to find it's going to take off from whatever you have it sitting, and what direction it go. You know, we may have cabled things up wrong here, and it could go in any direction. So by putting it up on this block, it just kind of protects it. And then, of course, I'm going to move the wires around so that there's no chance of any of the wires getting caught into wheels here. So now we're going to switch over back to our computer and do some configuration there. We've got our Raspberry Pi motor controller motors all cabled up. I've booted up my Raspberry Pi here, and now we're going to do some configuration. So the first thing I mentioned, the project Wiring Pi, we need to install that. So if you're interested in doing a little bit more research into what is Wiring Pi, you can go to wiringpi.com, and Gordon's got a great website here that tells you all about it and all the different things that it can do. So to install this, the first thing we have to do, if you're running the Jessie Lite, we need to actually install the git.core module. So to do that, we simply type in sudo apt.get install git.core. And this is going to install the module. If you have the full Jessie, you won't have to do this. It should already be installed. So it's going to go ahead and install this for us. Once we do that, then we're going to use that Git to actually download the Wiring Pi module. So it's going to take a minute to install here, so I'll just pause the video. Okay, so now we have installed Git, and we're going to use it to download the Wiring Pi project. First, we want to make sure we're in the Raspberry Pi home directory, so just type in cd. That'll automatically take you back to Pi home. And then we use git clone git / git. So basically we're going to download the project from that site. So it's cloning the wiring Pi project, and we're done. So now we can cd into, if you actually do ls here, you'll see we've got a wiring Pi directory now, so we can cd into that. And then we were going to run a command called build, and this will actually build it out for us. You can see it's installing the different libraries and components. As you can see, it's all C with the .c at the end of it. There we go. So it's now installed, and we can start to use it. So test it out first, just to make sure everything's looking good. A couple of commands. First one is GPIO-V. This tells us the version that we're running of the project, and that how much memory and all of that, which is good. So that's all looking positive. Next thing we're going to do is a GPIO read all. Okay, so this currently shows the configuration of the different GPIO pins. So if you go back to our diagram here, you'll see that we want GPIO, physical pin 11, 13, 15, and 19 are what we're using to control it. So if we look at that, 11, 13, 15, and 19. So what mode are all these in? These are all in by default. Raspberry leaves them all in the in mode. We need those 4 pins to be configured in the out mode, because we're going to be sending commands from the Raspberry Pi to the motor controller. So we need to reconfigure these all in the out mode. So how do we do that? First thing, we use sudo nano. We're going to modify the rc.local file, etc.rc.local. We're going to go down near the end of this, but before the exit 0, add a couple lines in there, and we're going to add in the command GPIO-G, which means we're using the GPIO pin number. So mode 10 out. So it's configuring GPIO 10, which is the pin 19, as out. So that's the first GPIO. So we're going to do that for each of them. So GPIO-G mode 17 out. So again, when we look at our diagram, GPIO 17 is the connection on pin 11, and then we'll do the last 2 here. GPIO -G mode 22 out, and then the last one, GPIO-G mode 27 out. So there's our 4 GPIO pins that we're going to use to control the motor controller. This is very important, and it won't work if they're configured as in. So hopefully you've got already an understanding of the different modes of a GPIO pin and what we're doing here. So we're going to save this. So we're going to hit Control X. I'm going to say yes, save changes, file name, same file name. And then we're going to have to do a reboot here to have that take effect. So I'll pause the video here quickly while we do a reboot. Okay, our Raspberry Pi is back up. We're going to re-enter that same command, GPIO read all. And now you can see pin 11, 13, 15, and 19 are configured as out, which is exactly what we need. Perfect. Keep in mind that if you're using different GPIO pins, you will have to switch out the pin numbers that you're using instead of the ones that I'm using. Okay, so we're ready to kind of move on to the next section here, and that is we're going to configure the bash scripts that I have and test them out. So to do so, we need to change into the Make sure again that you're in the Pi home directory. Type in CD, then we're going to go into the www directory /CGI-bin. Okay, we do list the files in this directory. We'll see we've got a bunch of CGI files, which these are really just bash scripts. So let's take a look at one of these files. Forward CGI. And so we're using the GPIO command again from our project, GPIO-G write, and then the GPIO pin number, and then 0 means we're setting it low, and then we're doing 17, we're setting it high, and 27 setting it high, 22 setting it low. So for me, this should cause my wheels to turn forward. So we're setting them in a combination of low and high. So let's exit out of here. Okay, so let's try running one of these scripts. So we're going to do the forward.cgi. And as you can tell from the picture-in-picture video there, one of my wheels is actually turning the wrong way. So this really means that I have a cabling issue. So I've used stop.cgi to stop the video, and I'm going to now switch over to my external video and correct the issue. Okay, so to correct the issue, the left wheel for me was turning in the wrong direction. And when I look at my wiring diagram, I can actually see I've got the cables reversed here. I should, according to my diagram, the pin next to the closest to the heatsink here should actually be black, and as you can see, I've actually got the red there, so I need to remove these. And switch them around. So I'm going to put the black closest to the heatsink and the red in the other one. Give them a little tug, and they're both in there secure. So we're going to now switch back to the computer. We're going to try out the script again, forward.cgi. And as you can see, they are now moving both in the forward direction. So we stop that. So now we can go through and test out each one of them. So let's try the left.cgi. And as you can tell, for turning left, the left wheel is turning in the reverse and the right wheel is turning forward, which is what we want. We'll stop that. So we can do the same for the right. So similar to the left, this time the right wheel is turning in reverse and the left wheel is turning forward. And then the last one is reverse. And both wheels are now turning reverse. Okay, so a couple troubleshooting steps here. Definitely if the wheels are turning in the wrong direction, you'll want to check the cabling on the coming from the motors to the motor controller and make sure they're you can simply reverse them. The other thing is if you have no power light on the L228N, it means it's not getting the 5 volts from the Raspberry Pi. So as long as you got that switch in the up position, there should be, the red light should be on because it's getting power from the Raspberry Pi. If you don't have that, then you've got a cabling issue somewhere along the way. If the motors are not working, obviously check the GPIO pins, ensure that they're configured in the out mode, so check the rc.local file, make sure that's all set up right, and then of course make sure your battery, your LiPro battery or whatever it is that you're using is charged. Okay, I'm just going to switch over to my external view. Okay, a couple of things I'm going to do before we go into the next video. I won't actually do them here, but I'm just going to show you. I'm going to connect up the battery to the bottom of my platform. I'm going to do that using one of these 3M strips, and I'm just going to put that right onto the battery and then connect it up to the bottom of the platform. I'm also going to install my plexiglass, or kind of install my plexiglass on top of the platform as it sits today, and I'm going to mount the Raspberry Pi to the plexiglass and then tuck in some of the wires into that. Before I do that, I'm actually going to connect up the power over Ethernet module, basically again using 3M modules or 3M connectors, things here that have Velcro on them. I'm just going to connect that up there and then bring up the cable so I can plug it into the Raspberry Pi. I'm going to do all this before I start the next video, so you'll want to make sure you're doing some of these steps on yours as well. Okay, that brings us to an end for video 2. In video 3, we're going to install our web server. We're going to move some of our code into the proper directory for the web server, and then we're going to actually test out controlling our motors through a web browser. So it's going to be the first time that we're using the web app to actually control a component of our Raspberry Pi. So stay tuned for video 3.